Since the dawn of humanity, when the first societies began to organize themselves, norms and prohibitions emerged as fundamental pillars to structure coexistence and define boundaries between the sacred and the profane. But who, in fact, shaped these rules? And why do some of these prohibitions remain so relevant, spanning centuries and cultures? Among all the questions surrounding human behavior, one of the most intriguing is the spiritual identity that these restrictions help to construct. Let us take pork as an example. While Jews and Muslims strictly follow the commandment that classifies it as impure, justifying its prohibition by divine decisions, Christianity broke with this practice at a certain point. But what truly motivated this change? What mysteries and profound meanings lie hidden behind this cultural and religious rupture? And, more importantly, are these rules merely reflections of a divine will, or do they conceal human and historical influences that manipulate the perception of what is sacred? In this video, we will embark together on a fascinating journey through sacred texts and rich historical tradition, seeking to uncover little explored truths and reveal the hidden meanings behind ancient religious prohibitions. If you appreciate content like this, take the opportunity now to like the video and subscribe to the channel. This way you ensure access to our upcoming publications full of surprising discoveries and thought-provoking reflections. Shall we proceed? One of the central themes of our analysis is the Old Testament and its strict prohibition regarding pork. This guidance is found in the book of Leviticus, one of the pillars of Jewish law. In specific chapters and verses, God classifies the pig as an unclean animal, justifying this prohibition based on its physical characteristics, such as split hooves and its associations with dirty and degrading environments. The sacred text warns, music, "You shall not eat any abomination that has a split hoof, does not chew the cud, is unclean for you." Furthermore, another command reinforces the same idea. Music, "The pig, a filthy animal that feeds on dead matter and carrion, must be avoided." This prohibition, however, goes beyond the spiritual context. During the period when the people of Israel wandered in the desert, extreme heat conditions made pork a potential vector for serious diseases, such as trichinosis. In this sense, divine law also fulfilled the role of protecting the physical health of the community, offering practical guidance to avoid risks to the survival of God's people. The issue surrounding pork goes beyond the boundaries of hygiene and health, deeply penetrating spiritual symbolism and cultural identity. In the Jewish tradition, the pig is not just an unclean animal, but an emblem laden with spiritual meanings. Concepts like nechi, related to what is sacred and what represents impurity or evil, helped define the boundaries between Israel and the surrounding nations. Israel's calling was clear: to be holy, that is separated, dedicated exclusively to God. The strict observance of these dietary laws, recorded in books like Leviticus and Deuteronomy, not only shaped daily life, but also strengthened the sense of obedience and devotion to the Lord. A verse from Deuteronomy echoes this guideline. Music, give it to the foreigner who resides among you, so he may eat it or sell it to foreigners. But you, dedicated to the Lord your God, must not consume it. This commandment reveals that dietary prohibitions were not merely health concerns, but also a constant reminder of their spiritual uniqueness and their calling to avoid pagan customs practiced by neighboring nations. This special relationship with God was reinforced through the restriction of foods considered impure, such as pork, which symbolized a connection with external practices and influences incompatible with divine principles. This principle of holiness not only maintained the cultural and spiritual purity of the people of Israel, but also reinforced deep divisions between them and the surrounding peoples. The Old Testament also helps us understand why religions like Judaism and Islam continue to prohibit the consumption of pork to this day. In the case of Islam, this rule is clearly expressed in the Quran, in Surah 2:173, which states, "Allah has forbidden the flesh of swine and blood, and that which has been dedicated to other than Allah." Muslims classify pork as haram, meaning something forbidden and impure. Just like in Judaism, this prohibition combines a spiritual and practical character, reinforcing religious identity and protecting the community from potential risks, both physical and spiritual, by adhering to these restrictions. Christianity followed a remarkably different path when it comes to pork. But why did Christians abandon this prohibition that remains so central to Jews and Muslims? And how does this relate to the teachings of Jesus and the Acts of the Apostles? In Islam, consuming pork is still seen as a direct affront to divine law, a clear disobedience to the norms established by Allah. Besides its spiritual character, the Muslim prohibition also plays a practical role. In hot climates, similar to those described in the Bible, the risk of diseases transmitted by undercooked meat was considerable, especially in regions where Islam originated. Thus, this rule, beyond being a principle of spiritual purity, also contributed to protecting the health and discipline of the community. But the question arises, if Jews and Muslims maintained the prohibition of pork, why did Christians, who share part of the same religious foundation, decide to abandon it? The answer lies in the radical transformation introduced by the New Testament. With the arrival of Jesus, many of the laws of the Old Covenant were reinterpreted and took on new meanings. A striking example is found in the Gospel of Mark, chapter 7. Jesus teaches, "Music. Nothing that enters a person from the outside can defile them. It is what comes out of a person that defiles them." This revolutionary teaching declared that all foods are pure, offering a completely new perspective. For Jesus, true purity did not reside in the foods we consume, but in the intentions and feelings that arise from the human heart: pride, hatred, envy, and dishonesty. This message not only diminished the importance of the Old Testament dietary laws, but also marked a fundamental shift in how spirituality was understood. This idea gained even more strength in the Book of Acts, where one of the most significant visions involving Peter is recorded. In a moment of prayer, Peter saw a large sheet descending from heaven, containing various animals that were considered unclean, including the pig. A divine voice commanded, "Music, rise, Peter, kill and eat." Alarmed, Peter replied, "By no means, Lord. I have never eaten anything impure or unclean." But the voice insisted, "Do not call impure what God has made clean." This vision, described in Acts 10:9-16, not only indicated that the Old Testament dietary restrictions were no longer mandatory for Christians, but also carried a deeper meaning. It symbolized that the gospel was not exclusive to the Jewish people, but intended for all peoples and nations. This revelation paved the way for a new era in Christianity, where cultural and dietary barriers no longer limited access to the message of salvation. Thus, in Christianity, pork ceased to be considered impure, marking a profound change in how spirituality and the relationship with God were experienced. The teachings of Jesus and the apostles brought a renewed focus on the inner spiritual dimension, placing the purity of the heart and faith above external norms. This approach reflects a transformative principle. True holiness does not lie in rituals or dietary restrictions, but in the integrity of the relationship with God. However, this difference in perspective leads us to a broader reflection on how dietary practices shape cultural and spiritual identity in different religions. In Judaism, for example, following a kosher diet goes beyond health issues or cultural traditions. It is a profound act of obedience and holiness. The word kosher means proper or clean, and every permitted food becomes a daily reminder of the special covenant between the Jewish people and God. This practice reinforces Israel's uniqueness as a holy people, set apart for the Lord, and preserves their cultural and spiritual identity through the centuries, even in contexts of dispersion and persecution. Observing kosher laws is not just a way to nourish the body, but also to feed the soul, connecting Jews to their heritage and values while highlighting their uniqueness in a diverse world. Similarly, in Islam, the prohibition of pork plays a central role in shaping culture and spirituality. This practice symbolizes absolute obedience to God and a commitment to purity, both physical and spiritual. The word halal, which can be translated as permitted, is intrinsically linked to the Quranic guidelines that direct Muslims to follow specific dietary standards as a manifestation of faith and submission to Allah's will. The cleanliness required by halal is not merely external, it reflects spiritual discipline, promoting reverence and self-control. Abstaining from pork, for example, is a constant practice that strengthens devotion, faith, and community bonds. In many Islamic societies, sharing halal meals reinforces the sense of unity and belonging, creating an environment of fraternity among the faithful. In Christianity, the approach to food reflects a fundamental transformation. Instead of focusing on external restrictions, Christians began to emphasize internal spiritual guidance. Jesus highlighted that nothing that enters a person's mouth can defile them. What comes out of their mouth is what defiles them. This shift marked the end of the Old Testament ceremonial restrictions and brought a new emphasis on the condition of the heart and direct communication with God. This principle is reinforced in the Epistle to the Romans, chapter 14, which states, "The kingdom of God is not a matter of eating and drinking, but of righteousness, peace, and joy in the Holy Spirit." However, this freedom is not without responsibility. The Apostle Paul warns that although everything is permissible, not everything is beneficial. He teaches that Christians should act carefully to avoid behaviors that might become stumbling blocks for others. This combination of freedom and responsibility reflects the spiritual maturity sought in Christianity, where the inner life and relationship with God take priority, but always with attention to the impact of our actions on the faith and well-being of others. Thus, whether through strict prohibitions or the freedom of choice regarding food, all religions share a common goal: to honor God and strengthen the spiritual identity of their followers. In a world where cultures and religious beliefs coexist in an increasingly interconnected manner, understanding these dietary differences helps us cultivate not only mutual respect, but also a deeper reflection on the meanings of purity, faith, and spiritual commitment in our lives. Eating, in this context, transcends the physical act. It becomes an expression of faith, identity, and connection with the divine. Sacred dietary practices serve as constant reminders that the essential aspect is not what we consume, but what flows from our hearts. It is our words, actions, and intentions, love, compassion, and faith that truly define who we are, regardless of our traditions or eating habits. This principle invites us to a life of introspection, where spiritual purity and the connection with God are always at the forefront. The purity of our hearts and the way we live our faith daily are undoubtedly the central points of this reflection. Whether through discipline and obedience to dietary laws or the freedom and responsibility we carry in our choices, dietary practices symbolize more than physical nourishment. They represent a profound commitment to identity, faith, and obedience to God. In a world marked by cultural and religious differences, respecting these distinctions is essential for building bridges and strengthening mutual understanding. In the end, it is not what enters our bodies that determines who we are, but what springs from our hearts: kindness, mercy, and devotion. May these truths inspire us to live with more love and purpose in our spiritual journeys. If this content inspired you and you wish to continue exploring spiritual reflections and issues that connect us with God, subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any of our publications. Share this video with your friends and family so more people can reflect on these important topics. May you continue to grow in health, wisdom, and faith. Until the next video.